In the unforgiving rain of downtown Atlanta, a homeless boy dances barefoot on cracked concrete, spinning in worn-out shoes as pedestrians hurry past without a glance. But when a sleek black Bentley stops unexpectedly, something extraordinary happens. From inside the luxury vehicle, a sound breaks through the silence, the laughter of a wheelchair-bound girl who hasn't made a sound in over a year. Why does this wealthy man's daughter recognize a street child she's never met? What dark secret connects them, buried under years of guilt and silence? As Gregory Beaumont, one of Georgia's most powerful men, comes face to face with his greatest mistake, lives will change forever. A silver brooch with a hidden history, a nurse with fading memories fighting to protect her charge, a room in a mansion prepared years ago for someone who never arrived, until now. This story of family secrets, redemption, and the healing power of dance will break your heart before putting it back together. Follow our channel for more stories that reveal the extraordinary connections between strangers whose paths were always destined to cross. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The raindrops hit the cracked sidewalk like indecisive tears, but the boy with tangled hair spun on the asphalt as if it were a stage. With bare feet squeezed into shoes much too small for him, Elijah twirled in silence, his mouth slightly open in pain, his eyes filled with something that seemed stronger than hunger. Hope. Nobody stopped, nobody looked, until that black car pulled over, and until that sound, absent for months, broke through the air, a girl's laughter. Atlanta in November wasn't supposed to be this cold. The rain fell steady and mean, the kind that soaked through everything without the decency of a proper storm. Most people hurried past, collars up, umbrellas tilted against the wind that swept between the downtown buildings. But not Elijah. The 12-year-old boy had claimed his spot at the corner of Peachtree and Pine, where the fancy shopping district bled into the forgotten parts of the city. His audience was the indifferent stream of passers-by, mothers clutching children's hands, businessmen with Bluetoothed ears, tourists consulting phones. None bothered to notice the skinny figure performing for nobody. Elijah wore faded jeans with fraying hems, a too-large sweatshirt with a university logo he couldn't read, and those painful shoes, a donation that had arrived at the shelter 3 months too late and 2 sizes too small. But when he danced, he transformed. His arms became wings, his torso a current of electricity. Every movement told a story his voice couldn't. "Look at that crazy kid," someone muttered, hurrying past. Elijah didn't hear them. He was someplace else, someplace warm with soft beds and hot food and people who remembered your birthday. His feet ached with each turn, but he pushed through it. Dancing made him visible. Dancing made him real. Then came the Bentley, sleek as a bullet, windows tinted against judgment. It stopped abruptly, tires hissing against wet asphalt. The rear window lowered just enough to reveal a small face framed by dark curls, a little girl's face, pale as paper, eyes wide with something like recognition. Inside that car sat Gregory Beaumont, 53, whose name adorned half the city's development projects and charity galas. A man who'd built his reputation on calculated risks and perfect timing. He hadn't planned to stop here. He'd only pulled over to take an urgent call from Tokyo. But that call was forgotten now, his phone still buzzing in his hand. "Ava, what is it?" he asked, following his daughter's transfixed gaze. Ava Beaumont had spent 9 years in this world, the last 2 in a wheelchair. She hadn't spoken much since the accident that took her mother and her ability to walk. The specialists called it selective mutism triggered by trauma. Gregory called it his punishment. She sat motionless beside him most days, her eyes vacant, her small hands folded in her lap like a surrender. But now she was leaning forward, her hands pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the window. And that sound, that impossible sound, bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. Laughter. It started small, a hiccup of joy, then grew into something wild and unrestrained. She laughed as if remembering how, each giggle louder than the last, until her whole body shook with it. "Sir?" The driver glanced back, concerned. "Everything okay?" Gregory couldn't answer. He was staring at his daughter, witnessing a miracle. Ava hadn't laughed in 14 months, not since the night of screeching tires and shattering glass, not since he'd made the call that changed everything. Outside, unaware of his audience, Elijah continued his solitary performance. He spun faster now, one hand extended upward as if reaching for something just beyond his grasp. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, ran in rivulets down his thin cheeks. His eyes were closed, his expression one of pure concentration. "Look at him, Daddy," Ava whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Look how he flies." Gregory's throat tightened. He'd spent millions trying to make his daughter smile again. Specialists from Switzerland, experimental therapies, even a dolphin encounter in Florida. Nothing had worked. Nothing until this moment, this street corner, this boy who danced like nobody was watching. "Who is he?" Gregory asked softly, not expecting an answer. Ava's small hands clutched her tablet, pressing record. The screen captured Elijah's dance, preserving each movement in pixels and light. Her eyes never left the boy, and something in her gaze, something knowing and ancient, made Gregory's skin prickle. "He's like me," she said, her voice suddenly clear. "He's pretending too." Gregory frowned. "Pretending what, sweetheart?" "That it doesn't hurt." The simple words landed like stones. Gregory stared at his daughter, then back at the boy. What had she seen that he couldn't? What connection had formed in the space of minutes that he'd failed to forge in months of trying? Elijah finished his dance with a final spin, then stood motionless in the rain, chest heaving, eyes still closed. For a moment, he looked impossibly small against the city's vastness, a period at the end of a sentence nobody bothered to read. When he opened his eyes, they locked directly with Ava's. Something passed between them, a current, a recognition, a secret. The boy's expression shifted from surprise to something like fear. He took a step backward, suddenly aware of being watched. Ava's grip tightened on her tablet. Her next words fell into the silence of the car like a prophecy, like a memory, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut. "Dad, I know him." Gregory's world tilted on its axis. The rain outside seemed to freeze mid-fall. The Tokyo executives waited in vain on the other end of the forgotten call. Something about the boy's face, about Ava's certainty, about the sudden weight of destiny pressing down on his chest. It all whispered of debts unpaid and truths buried. And perhaps most terrifying of all, Gregory believed her. The Beaumont mansion stood like a modern fortress on the outskirts of Atlanta, all glass and angles against the Georgia sky. As the Bentley glided through the wrought iron gates, Gregory couldn't shake the chill that had settled in his bones. It wasn't from the November rain. It was from his daughter's words, still echoing in the silence between them. "I know him." The house lights activated automatically as they entered, sensing their presence. 5,200 square feet of luxury, designed by an architect whose name Gregory had dropped at dinner parties. Once, it had felt like an achievement. Tonight, it felt hollow, like something borrowed. "Ava," Gregory said softly as Williams, the driver, helped lift his daughter's wheelchair from the car. "What did you mean back there? About knowing that boy?" Ava's face had retreated behind that familiar mask, the one she'd worn since the accident. Her momentary animation had faded, but something lingered in her eyes. She clutched her tablet against her chest like a shield. "Can I see what you recorded?" he asked, reaching for the device. Ava hesitated, then surrendered it with reluctance. Gregory's fingers trembled slightly as he pressed play. The video was shaky but clear, the dancing boy spinning in the rain, oblivious to the world around him. Gregory watched, searching for what had triggered his daughter's recognition. "Wait," he murmured, pausing the footage. "There's something—" He zoomed in on the background where the storefront windows reflected the scene like dark mirrors. In one pane, barely visible through the raindrops on the glass, was another figure, a woman elderly and slight, standing in the shadows of an alleyway across the street. The angle wasn't good, but Gregory could make out a weathered face watching the boy with fierce intensity. "Who is that?" he whispered, more to himself than to Ava. "Miss Wren," Ava said, the name slipping out like a secret. Gregory's head snapped up. "What did you say?" But Ava had closed down again, her face blank, her small hands folded in her lap. Anna, the night nurse, appeared in the doorway. "Time for your medication, Miss Ava," she announced with practiced cheerfulness. Gregory watched his daughter being wheeled away, questions piling up behind his teeth. Where had she heard that name? How did she recognize a street child she'd never met? What wasn't she telling him? He retreated to his study, a room of leather and mahogany that still smelled faintly of his ex-wife's perfume, though she'd never returned to claim it. The rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers as he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon. His phone buzzed, Tokyo again. He silenced it without looking. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed 3 words into the search bar. Miss Wren Atlanta. Nothing useful came up. He tried variations. Wren Nurse Georgia, Wren Orphanage, Wren Children's Services. The results were scattered and meaningless. Whatever connection existed between this woman, the dancing boy, and his daughter remained hidden. Gregory rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a migraine. He scrolled back through the video, frame by frame, studying the boy's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about those features, something that tugged at memories he'd carefully locked away. "Sir?" Williams stood in the doorway, his uniform still damp from the rain. "I've secured the house for the night. Will you be needing anything else?" Gregory hesitated. "Williams, you've been with my family for what, 12 years now?" 14 this March, sir. The name Wren, does it mean anything to you? In connection with Ava, perhaps, or before? Before. The word hung between them, laden with unspoken history. Before the accident, before the divorce, before everything had shattered. Williams's face remained professionally blank. "I'm afraid not, sir." "Should it?" "No," Gregory said quickly. "Just something I overheard. Good night, Williams." After the driver left, Gregory returned to the video. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious, something important. He poured another drink, letting the bourbon burn away his hesitation. "Computer," he said to the house's AI system, "call Darren Mercer." There was a brief pause before the line connected. "Do you have any idea what time it is, Greg?" The voice on the other end was gruff with sleep. "I need a favor, Darren. Off the books." A sigh crackled through the speaker. "You always did have a gift for timing. I need you to find someone for me. A boy, around 12, first name unknown, homeless, probably in the downtown area." Gregory swallowed hard. "And an elderly woman, possibly named Wren. That's not much to go on. I'll send you footage. And Darren, I need this quiet, very quiet." After ending the call, Gregory stood at the window, watching the rain transform his manicured garden into a dark, formless place. Behind him, the bourbon glass sat abandoned, the ice melting into weak amber puddles. Miles away, in the abandoned Vine City subway station, Elijah slipped through a maintenance door that hadn't locked properly in years. The tunnel beyond was his sanctuary, a forgotten place where the city's rhythms faded to distant echoes. "Miss Wren," he called softly. "I'm back." The underground space had once been a storage area. Now it held their meager possessions: 2 thin mattresses, a camp stove, crates of carefully organized supplies. Miss Wren had made it almost homey, with salvaged battery lamps and faded curtains partitioning the space. The old woman looked up from her tattered notebook. "You're soaked through, child. Come warm yourself." Elijah's shoes squished as he crossed to her. One sole had finally given way, hanging by threads. "I'll need to find new ones soon," he said, pulling them off carefully. "Did anyone see you dancing?" Miss Wren asked, her eyes sharp, despite the cloudiness of early dementia. Elijah hesitated, remembering the black car, the girl's face at the window. "No," he lied. "Nobody important." He tucked the ruined shoe under his blanket, making sure the small object hidden inside remained secure. It was the only thing he had left that mattered, the only thing he would never surrender, no matter how hungry he got. Miss Wren studied him with eyes that seemed to see right through his deception. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "I found this today while you were gone," she said. "I can't remember what it means, but I know it's important." Elijah took it carefully. The envelope was old, the flap torn. On the back, barely legible, was a name: Dr. Alexander Keating, Director. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Miss Wren's brow furrowed. I can't remember. Something about promises." She turned away, frustrated by the gaps in her memory that grew wider each day. Elijah tucked the envelope into his own pocket, adding it to the growing collection of puzzle pieces that made up his past, fragments that someday might form a complete picture. Outside, in the city above, a black car prowled the empty streets, searching. Darren Mercer had been Atlanta's most discreet investigator for 25 years. He'd seen the city transform from a southern crossroads into a sprawling metropolis of glass and ambition. He'd watched men like Gregory Beaumont climb to the top, stepping on whoever stood in their way. Now sitting in his weathered Chevy outside the Beaumont mansion, He wondered what secrets this particular rich man was hiding. "You said it was urgent," Darren said, accepting the coffee Gregory handed him. Morning light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the immaculate lawn. "Found something interesting already?" Gregory's eyes narrowed. "That was fast. Your dancing boy made it easy." Darren pulled out his tablet. "He's performing again today. Sweet Auburn Farmers Market. Word is he's been showing up there weekends for a month now." Gregory studied the screen, which showed a map with a pulsing red dot. "And the woman? Miss Wren?" "Nothing concrete yet. But there's something else." Darren hesitated. "That area where you spotted the kid, 2 blocks from the old St. Nest Children's Home." The coffee cup froze halfway to Gregory's lips. St. Nest was shut down years ago. 7 years to be exact. After those abuse allegations hit the press. Darren watched Gregory carefully. "Your company was a major donor, if I recall." Gregory set down his cup with deliberate care. Beaumont Holdings supported many charitable institutions, including the ones that needed to bury their scandals. "That's enough, Darren." Gregory's voice turned to ice. "Find the boy, that's all I'm asking." Inside the house, Ava sat by her bedroom window, watching the 2 men talk. Her fingers traced patterns on her tablet screen, replaying the video of Elijah dancing, pausing on his face, searching for something only she could see. "Miss Ava?" Anna, the nurse, entered with a breakfast tray. "Not hungry again?" Ava ignored the food. "I want to go out today." Anna blinked in surprise. "Out? Where would you like to go, sweetheart?" "To find him." Ava turned her tablet to show Elijah's frozen image. "The dancing boy." "Oh, honey, I don't think—" "Please." The word hung in the air, not a request but a demand. Something had awakened in Ava, something determined and fierce. "I need to find him." The Sweet Auburn curb market hummed with weekend energy. Local farmers arranged produce in rainbow rows, artisans displayed handcrafted goods, and food stalls filled the air with competing aromas. For most visitors, it was a pleasant Saturday outing. For Elijah, it was a battlefield where every smile, every movement had to count. He'd positioned himself near the main entrance, where foot traffic was heaviest. His cardboard sign was simple but effective. "Need medicine for Grandma." Miss Wren had objected to the lie. She wasn't his grandmother, and they could still afford her medication barely. But Elijah knew sympathy was currency, and they needed every penny. His dance today was different, more controlled, less wild. He'd practiced it for hours in the tunnel, each movement calibrated to draw attention without seeming desperate. A thin baseball cap sat on the ground before him, containing 3 $1 bills and some loose change. Enough for coffee, not enough for survival. "That boy can move," a woman in designer yoga wear remarked to her friend, dropping a $5 bill into the cap as they passed. Elijah nodded thanks without breaking rhythm. He'd learned early that speaking broke the spell, reminded people that he was real, with real needs, and nobody wanted that reminder during their Saturday shopping. Across the market, a young mother stopped to watch, her phone raised to capture the performance. Elijah noticed but didn't change expression. Social media could be helpful. Sometimes videos of street performers went viral, bringing brief fame and donations. Other times they brought unwanted attention from authorities. "My daughter loves dance," the woman said, approaching after the video. "You're really talented. Do you take classes somewhere?" The question stung like salt on a wound. "Used to," Elijah answered simply, keeping his smile intact. "Thank you, ma'am." As she walked away, Elijah caught a glimpse of the phone screen, his image already being uploaded, captioned, "Amazing Street Kid at Auburn Market, an Atlanta Hidden Talent." He felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Visibility was both salvation and danger. By noon, the cap held nearly $40, a good haul, enough for Miss Wren's medication with a little left over for food. Elijah was gathering his earnings when he felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched, not by the casual observers who'd come and gone all morning, but by someone else, someone searching. He scanned the crowd, heart quickening. There, a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, pretending to examine organic apples while his attention remained fixed on Elijah. One of the market's security guards, perhaps, or worse, someone from child services. Elijah pocketed the money and began packing up, movements casual but urgent. He'd learned to vanish at the first sign of trouble. As he turned to leave, his gaze caught on something that froze his blood. A sleek black Bentley parked across the street. the same car from yesterday, and beside it, being helped into a wheelchair by a uniformed driver, was the girl who had laughed at his dance. "Are you absolutely certain this is wise, sir?" Williams asked as he positioned Ava's wheelchair on the curb. "Miss Ava hasn't been in crowds since the accident." "I know." Gregory straightened his daughter's sweater, trying to ignore the stares of passers-by. The Beaumonts rarely appeared in public these days, but she insisted, Williams. She actually insisted on something. "Do you understand what that means?" Williams nodded, his face softening. "Yes, sir, I do." Ava's eyes darted through the market entrance, scanning faces with fierce concentration. Her small hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests, knuckles white with tension. "He's here," she said suddenly. "I can feel it." Gregory exchanged glances with Williams. "Ava, sweetheart, we don't even know if—" "There!" Ava's fingers shot out, pointing toward a skinny figure slipping between market stalls. "That's him!" Before Gregory could respond, Ava had released her wheelchair's brake and pushed herself forward with surprising strength, disappearing into the Saturday crowd. "Ava!" Gregory lunged after her, panic rising in his throat. "Williams, call Darren! Tell him we found the boy!" As Gregory pushed through the crowd, phone vibrating in his pocket, a news alert flashed across his screen. Former St. Nest orphanage property slated for demolition next month. Below it, a photograph of a dilapidated Victorian building surrounded by chain-link fence, its windows boarded up like blind eyes. The orphanage, just blocks away. It couldn't be coincidence. Gregory's mind raced back 7 years to closed-door meetings and hushed conversations, to documents signed in haste, to problems that money could make disappear, or so he'd thought. He caught up to Ava at the market's far exit, her wheelchair wedged between displays of local honey. She was staring at the space where Elijah had been, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "He saw us," she said, voice breaking. "He ran away." Gregory knelt beside his daughter, his own heart pounding with conflicting emotions, relief at finding her, fear of the questions building inside her, questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Daddy?" Ava said, looking directly into his eyes with unsettling clarity. "You've been there before, haven't you? To that place where he came from?" The simple question hit Gregory like a physical blow. He stared at his daughter, the noise of the market fading around them, the years of careful silence threatening to crumble. "What makes you say that?" he managed. "Because," Ava said, her voice suddenly older than her years, "he looks just like the boy in the picture you hide in your desk. The one you look at when you think no one can see." The pharmacy on Edgewood Avenue was nearly empty at dusk. Fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow across the aisles as Elijah counted out crumpled bills at the counter, his heart still racing from the market encounter. "That'll be $38.50, the pharmacist said, sliding the small paper bag across the counter. Elijah handed over the money, leaving him with just over $1. Not enough for dinner, but Miss Wren's medication came first. Always first. "You've been getting this prescription filled for a while now," the pharmacist remarked, studying Elijah over his glasses. "Your grandmother doing any better?" Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "Some days are good, some aren't." The pharmacist nodded sympathetically. "Alzheimer's is tough, you taking care of her by yourself." "We take care of each other," Elijah answered, tucking the medication into his backpack. As he turned to leave, the bell above the door jingled. Elijah froze. Gregory Beaumont stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the fading daylight, tall and imposing in his tailored coat. Their eyes met across the fluorescent-lit space. Recognition, then wariness. "There you are," Gregory said quietly, as if they'd had an appointment. "We've been looking for you." Elijah's gaze darted to the back exit. Could he make it before the man caught him? Probably not. Gregory Beaumont didn't look like someone who often failed to get what he wanted. "I'm not going to hurt you," Gregory continued, approaching slowly with hands slightly raised. "My name is Gregory Beaumont. I believe you met my daughter yesterday." "I didn't meet anyone," Elijah said, backing away. "I don't know what you want. I just want to talk." Gregory reached into his pocket, and Elijah tensed. But what emerged wasn't a weapon or a phone to call authorities. It was a thick fold of cash. "For your dance, my daughter. She hasn't laughed in a very long time." The money hung between them like a question. Elijah stared at it, calculating what it could buy. Weeks of safety, proper food, maybe even a real doctor for Miss Wren instead of pharmacy samples and outdated prescriptions. "Take it," Gregory urged. "No strings attached." Elijah hesitated, then reached for the money with a hand that betrayed his hunger. As his fingers closed around the bills, Gregory's free hand caught his wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to prevent escape. "But I would like to understand," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "why my daughter thinks she knows you." Outside, twilight had settled over Atlanta, streetlights flickering to life along Edgewood Avenue. Gregory's Bentley idled at the curb, Williams at the wheel, engine purring softly. The back door stood open. "Please," Gregory said, gesturing to the car, "come meet Ava properly. She's been asking for you all day." Elijah clutched his backpack tighter. "I need to get home." "Someone's waiting." "Miss Wren?" Gregory asked, watching the boy's face carefully. Elijah's expression hardened. "How do you know that name?" "I don't, not really. My daughter mentioned it." Gregory hesitated, then played his final card. "She needs her medication, doesn't she? The prescription you just filled, donepezil for Alzheimer's. I can help with that, with everything." For a moment, Elijah seemed to waver. Then his chin lifted defiantly. "We don't need your help. We don't need anything from people like you. People like me. Rich people. People who think money fixes everything." Elijah's voice trembled slightly. "People who forget about children behind gates." The words struck Gregory like a physical blow. He stepped back, his composed facade cracking. "What did you say?" Elijah seized the moment of confusion to bolt, darting down a narrow alley between buildings. Gregory started after him, then stopped, watching the boy vanish into the gathering darkness. Back in the car, Ava waited, her face pressed against the window. When Gregory returned alone, her disappointment was palpable. "He didn't want to come," Gregory explained, settling beside her. "Because you scared him," Ava said simply. "He thinks you're the man from the gate." Gregory stared at his daughter. "What do you know about that, Ava? About gates?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached for his hand, her small fingers cool against his palm. "He needs us," she said with quiet certainty. "But you need him too, don't you, Daddy?" The question hung in the air as Williams guided the Bentley back toward Buckhead, toward the safety of the Beaumont mansion. Gregory gazed out at the passing city, the gleaming downtown towers giving way to shabby neighborhoods, then rising again into the manicured affluence of Atlanta's elite enclaves. Two worlds, separated by invisible boundaries he crossed without thought. Gates. The word echoed in his mind like an accusation. Miss Wren's condition had deteriorated by the time Elijah returned to their underground sanctuary. She sat on her mattress, staring at the wall, her thin fingers plucking at a blanket that existed only in her memory. "James," she called as Elijah approached. "Is that you, James?" Elijah's heart sank. When Miss Wren confused him with her long-lost son, it meant the fog had descended heavily. These episodes were becoming more frequent, more prolonged. "It's Elijah, Miss Wren," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "I brought your medicine." She looked at him without recognition, then smiled vaguely. "Of course, Elijah, such a good boy. Always dancing." He helped her take the pill with careful sips of bottled water. "Remember what the doctor said? This helps keep the memories clear." Miss Wren nodded, though her eyes remained distant. "I remember so many things. Too many, perhaps." Her gaze suddenly sharpened, focusing on Elijah with startling clarity. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" "I knew they would, eventually." Elijah froze. "Who, Miss Wren?" "The man who promised." Her voice had changed, become firmer, as if she were momentarily breaking through the disease's fog. "The one who said he'd come back for you." From her cardigan pocket, she withdrew something small that caught the light of their battery lamp, a tarnished silver brooch, ornate and expensive looking. "I kept this," she whispered, "to remind me, to remind him." She pressed it into Elijah's palm. "When he comes, show him this. Make him remember his promise." Elijah examined the brooch, turning it over in his hands. On the back, engraved in flowing script, was a name that made his blood run cold. Beaumont. "Miss Wren," he asked carefully, "where did you get this?" But the moment of clarity had passed. Miss Wren's eyes had clouded again, her attention drifting. "James will be home from school soon," she murmured. "I should start dinner." Elijah clutched the brooch tightly, mind racing. The man in the pharmacy, the girl in the car, this tarnished piece of silver, connections forming like constellations, pointing toward answers he both craved and feared. Outside, in the dark streets above, he was unaware of a figure watching the abandoned subway entrance. Darren Mercer, noting the location in his phone before slipping away to report to his employer. And across town, in the silent halls of the Beaumont mansion, Gregory stood in his study, staring at a locked drawer in his desk. The drawer that held the photograph Ava had mentioned, a photograph he hadn't looked at in years, yet couldn't bring himself to destroy. As midnight approached, someone moved through the darkness of the Beaumont estate's perimeter, a silent figure that bypassed security systems with practiced ease, approaching the mansion with purpose. At the grand entrance, the intruder paused only long enough to tape a note to the door. "I know who he is, and you do too." Dawn broke over Atlanta with the color of bruised peaches. Gregory Beaumont stood on his balcony, the crumpled note crushed in his fist. He hadn't slept. The security footage showed nothing, just a shadow that appeared and disappeared between camera sweeps, as if the intruder knew exactly where the blind spots were. "I know who he is, and you do too." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the intent was clear. Blackmail or something worse. Gregory's phone vibrated, Darren calling earlier than usual. "I found them," Darren said without preamble. "The boy and the old woman. They're living in the abandoned Vine City subway station. And Greg, you need to see what I found in the records." An hour later, Gregory sat in Darren's cluttered office above a pawn shop in Midtown. The place smelled of old coffee and cigarettes, though Darren had quit smoking years ago. On the desk between them lay a manila folder stained and dog-eared with age. It wasn't easy, Darren explained, opening the folder to reveal photocopies of documents. Most St. Nest records were lost after the shutdown. Convenient, right? But I have contacts at the county clerk's office. These are fostering and adoption applications from 7 years ago. Gregory stared at the papers, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "This one," Darren continued, sliding forward a particular document, "is interesting. Temporary guardianship application for a 5-year-old boy. Birth mother deceased. Father." He tapped the document where black marker obscured a name. "Redacted, but not completely." Gregory leaned closer. Beneath the heavy black lines, the faint impression of letters remained. The distinctive curve of a B, the loop of an O, the crossbar of a T. "Beaumont. There's more," Darren said, his voice unnervingly gentle. The applicant for temporary guardianship was an Eleanor Wren, former nurse at Emory University Hospital, worked in the maternity ward for 30 years. Gregory's hands trembled as he reached for the document. Who authorized this redaction? That's where it gets interesting. The order came from the board of St. Nest Children's Home, the same board your company helped finance. Darren leaned back, watching Gregory carefully. "Want to tell me what's really going on, Greg?" Gregory's phone chimed with a text from Williams. "Miss Ava refusing breakfast again, asking for the boy, please advise." "I need to go," Gregory said, standing abruptly. "Greg," Darren's voice stopped him at the door. "Whatever this is, whoever that boy is to you, it's not going away. You know that, right?" Outside, Atlanta's morning traffic surged around him, oblivious to the earthquake happening in his private world. Gregory loosened his tie, feeling like he might suffocate. 7 years of carefully constructed walls were crumbling around him, and he had no idea how to stop it. The abandoned subway station had taken on a golden quality in the morning light. Dust motes danced in the beams that filtered through ventilation grates above, giving their underground home an almost magical atmosphere. On good days, Miss Wren called it their secret kingdom beneath the city. This was not a good day. Elijah sat beside her thin mattress, watching her breathe. The night had been rough, confusion followed by agitation, then finally a fitful sleep. The medication wasn't working as well anymore, or maybe the disease was just getting stronger. "Elijah!" Her voice startled him. Her eyes were open, clearer than they'd been in days. "What time is it?" "Almost 9, he answered, relief washing over him. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been wandering through fog," she said, attempting to sit up. Elijah quickly moved to help her. "I had such strange dreams, about the past, about promises." Elijah hesitated, then reached into his pocket for the silver brooch. "Do you remember giving me this last night?" Miss Wren stared at the ornament, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something like fear. "Where did you get that?" "From you," Elijah said gently. "You told me to show it to the man who promised. The name on it, Beaumont. It's the same as the man who tried to talk to me yesterday, the rich man with the little girl in the wheelchair." Miss Wren's face drained of color. She reached for the brooch with trembling fingers. Gregory Beaumont, she whispered. He found you. Who is he, Miss Wren? Why does his daughter think she knows me? Why did you call him the man from the gate? Miss Wren closed her eyes, her breathing labored. For a moment, Elijah feared she'd slipped back into confusion, but when she spoke again, her voice was steady. He was so young then, she began. Barely more than a boy himself. 22, 23 perhaps. She was 19, a college student. They weren't ready for complications. Elijah sat perfectly still, afraid any movement might break the spell, might stop the flow of truth he'd waited years to hear. Her name was Serena, Miss Wren continued. Beautiful girl, stubborn. She refused to take care of it, as they said in those days, but she knew she couldn't keep you either. Not alone. He promised to help, to make arrangements. Good arrangements. Her voice hardened. He lied. What happened? She died. Complications during delivery. And he changed his mind. Said it was too much, too soon. His family wouldn't understand. His future was too bright to be burdened. Miss Wren's eyes glistened with tears. I was there that night. I held you when you were born. I watched her die, and I watched him walk away. Elijah's world tilted beneath him. The pieces were falling into place, a puzzle whose picture he'd both longed for and dreaded. He's my father, he whispered. Gregory Beaumont is my father. Miss Wren nodded slowly. He arranged your placement at St. Nest, made donations to ensure discretion. I kept track of you there, visited when I could, and when the scandals started, when they were going to shut it down and scatter the children, she looked away. I couldn't let that happen to you, so I took you. You kidnapped me, Elijah said, the realization dawning. I saved you, she corrected fiercely, from foster care, from being lost in the system. I was going to adopt you properly. I had the papers started, but then, she gestured vaguely to her head, the forgetting began. Elijah sat back, overwhelmed. The story answered so many questions, yet opened a chasm of new ones. If Gregory Beaumont was his father, then the girl in the wheelchair, Ava, was his half-sister. The connection she'd felt, the recognition in her eyes. It made sense now. Why is he looking for me now? Elijah asked. After all this time? Before Miss Wren could answer, a noise from the station above froze them both. Footsteps, too deliberate to be random passers-by. Someone's coming, Elijah whispered, jumping to his feet. Miss Wren grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Elijah, listen to me, that brooch, I took it the night you were born. From his coat, keep it safe, it's proof of who you are, of what he owes you. The footsteps grew closer. Elijah helped Miss Wren to her feet, guiding her toward their emergency exit, a maintenance tunnel they'd mapped for exactly this scenario. Go, she urged him. I'll follow. But as they reached the tunnel entrance, Miss Wren stumbled, clutching her chest, her face contorted with pain. Miss Wren! Elijah caught her as she sagged against him. My pills, she gasped. The other ones, heart pills. Elijah fumbled in their medicine box, fingers closing around the second prescription bottle, the one they could barely afford, the one they sometimes skipped to make it last longer. Above them, a voice called out, Elijah? Miss Wren? It's Gregory Beaumont, I just want to talk. Elijah looked from the approaching footsteps to Miss Wren's ashen face, trapped between past and present, between escape and confrontation. The truth hung in the balance, along with something far more precious, the only person who had never abandoned him. Why did my mother call him the man at the gate? He whispered, even as he helped Miss Wren take her medication. Because, Miss Wren said between labored breaths, that's where he stood, outside the hospital gate, promising to return, promising to take care of both of you. Her eyes burned with decades-old anger. He never even came inside to see her, to see you. The footsteps halted at the entrance to their living area. Elijah straightened, placing himself between Miss Wren and the approaching figure. The silver brooch burned in his pocket like a coal. There you are, Gregory Beaumont said softly, stepping into the light. His eyes moved from Elijah to Miss Wren, recognition and shock crossing his features. Eleanor. My God, it is you. Hello, Gregory, Miss Wren replied, her voice suddenly strong, charged with the voltage of old wounds. You're about 7 years too late. The Beaumont mansion seemed different to Elijah, larger yet somehow suffocating, its pristine surfaces too perfect, too untouched by real life. He stood in the grand foyer, still wearing his threadbare clothes, clutching his backpack to his chest like armor. The contrast between his world and Gregory's couldn't have been more stark. Miss Wren lay upstairs in one of the guest suites, under the care of a private doctor Gregory had summoned with a single phone call. The episode in the tunnel had been a minor heart attack, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to warrant hospitalization. Miss Wren had refused the hospital. She hadn't, however, been able to refuse Gregory's insistence on bringing them both to his home, not with her condition so fragile. "She's stable now," the doctor informed Gregory as he descended the curved staircase. "But she needs rest, proper medication and monitoring. I'll have a nurse here within the hour." Gregory nodded, signing the check without looking at the amount. "Thank you, doctor. Discretion is—" "Understood," the doctor interrupted, glancing at Elijah. "I've worked with your family for 20 years, Mr. Beaumont." After the doctor left, silence stretched between Gregory and Elijah. The grandfather clock in the hall measured the awkward moments with solemn ticks. "Are you hungry?" Gregory finally asked. Elijah was starving, had been for days, but he shook his head. "I want to see Miss Wren. She's sleeping now. Best not to disturb her." Gregory gestured toward an open doorway. "The kitchen is this way. Mrs. Abernathy can make you anything you'd like." The kitchen was a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and marble, bigger than their entire subway sanctuary. A gray-haired woman in a crisp uniform turned from the stove, surprise flickering across her face at the sight of Elijah. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is—" "Elijah," Gregory said, the hesitation before the name heavy with unspoken complications. "He'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Abernathy recovered quickly, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Of course, sir. What would the young man like for breakfast?" Gregory looked at Elijah expectantly. "I'm not hungry," Elijah repeated, though his stomach betrayed him with an audible growl. "Pancakes, perhaps," Mrs. Abernathy suggested gently. "With blueberries. Miss Ava's favorite." At the mention of Ava, Elijah's resolve wavered. He hadn't seen the girl since being brought here late last night after Miss Wren's episode. "Where is she?" he asked Gregory. "Your daughter. In her room. She doesn't know you're here yet." Gregory checked his watch. "She usually has physical therapy at this hour." Mrs. Abernathy placed a glass of orange juice before Elijah. "Fresh squeezed," she said with a kind smile. "You look like you could use the vitamins." Elijah took the glass but didn't drink. "I don't want your charity." Gregory's jaw tightened. "It's not charity, it's—" He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "What then?" Elijah challenged, emboldened by all he'd learned from Miss Wren. "Conscience, guilt, Mrs. Abernathy looked between them, sensing the tension. "Perhaps I should check on Miss Ava," she murmured, quietly retreating. When they were alone, Gregory sat heavily on a kitchen stool. "You know, don't you?" he asked, voice low. "About your mother. About everything." "Not everything," Elijah replied. "Just what Miss Wren told me. That you were there the night I was born, that you walked away, that you arranged to hide me in that orphanage." His voice hardened. "That you forgot about me." Gregory flinched as if struck. "It wasn't that simple. Seems pretty simple to me. I was young. So was I." Elijah's shout echoed off the kitchen's hard surfaces. "So was my mother when she died." Gregory stared at his hands, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. The silence stretched again, broken only by the quiet humming of expensive appliances. "I won't accept anything from you," Elijah said finally. "Not food, not clothes, nothing. As soon as Miss Wren is better, we're leaving." "And going where?" Gregory asked. "Back to that underground hole? That's no place for an old woman with heart problems, no place for a child. We managed for 7 years without you. And look how well that turned out." The words came out harsher than Gregory intended. He sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I'm sorry. That was unfair. You've clearly taken good care of her under impossible circumstances." Elijah's grip tightened on the glass. "Don't pretend to care now." "I'm not pretending." Gregory's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "You have no idea what these past 7 years have been like. The searching, the guilt, the not knowing." Elijah gave a bitter laugh. "You're saying you looked for me? That's a lie. Miss Wren said you wanted me gone, buried, forgotten." "Miss Wren doesn't know everything," Gregory said. "There were complications, things I couldn't control." "More excuses." Elijah set down the untouched juice and stood. "I need to check on her." As he turned to leave, the kitchen door swung open. Ava sat in her wheelchair, still in her pajamas, hair unbrushed. Her eyes widened at the sight of Elijah, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "You came," she said simply. Elijah froze, caught between the urge to run and a strange pull toward this girl who shared his blood. She wheeled herself forward, stopping just before him. "I knew you would," she continued. "I told Daddy you belonged here." Gregory moved to his daughter's side. "Ava, sweetheart, you should be resting." She ignored him, her attention fixed on Elijah. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. This is your home too." "No, it's not," Elijah replied, but the fire had gone out of his voice. "Yes, it is. I've seen you here before." She tapped her temple. "In my dreams." Gregory placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Ava, there's something I need to explain. About Elijah, about who he is." "I know who he is," she said with the innocent certainty of a child. "He's my brother." The word hung in the air between them. Brother. So simple, yet so profound. Gregory looked stricken, while Elijah struggled to maintain his wall of anger against this unexpected acceptance. "How did you know?" Gregory asked his daughter. Ava pointed to a framed photograph on the wall, Gregory with his arm around a pregnant woman, both of them young and smiling. "That's his mommy, the lady in the picture, and when I saw him dancing, I remembered from before." Gregory knelt beside his daughter, confused. "Before what, sweetheart?" "Before the accident, when Mommy was alive. She told me I had a brother somewhere. She said you'd find him someday and bring him home." Ava turned to Elijah. "And now you did." Gregory's face went pale. "Charlotte knew." Ava nodded. "It was a secret. She said you weren't ready to know that she knew." Elijah looked between them, struggling to process this new information. Charlotte, Gregory's wife, Ava's mother, had known about him, had told Ava about him, had expected Gregory to find him someday. "Would you like to see your room?" Ava asked Elijah, seemingly unaware of the emotional earthquake she'd triggered. "Daddy had it ready for a long time. He just said it was for guests, but I knew." "Ava," Gregory began, but she was already wheeling herself toward the hallway, gesturing for Elijah to follow. Reluctantly, he did. They moved through the mansion's expansive ground floor to a corridor he hadn't seen before. At the end was a door, slightly ajar. "In there," Ava said. "Look." Elijah pushed the door open to reveal a bedroom, not an opulent guest suite, but a boy's room, with simple furniture, shelves of books, and walls painted a soft blue. It looked barely used, yet not unlived in, as if it had been waiting. "I don't understand," Elijah whispered. From the doorway, Gregory spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I made it ready. When we built this house, after Charlotte and I married, she insisted, said someday I'd need to make things right." He swallowed hard. "I never told her about you, about Serena, but somehow she knew." Elijah moved slowly into the room, touching a desk, a bookshelf, the edge of the bed, a real bed with a proper mattress and clean sheets. "She told me stories about you," Ava said, following him in. "My brother who could dance like the wind. She said when you came home you'd teach me." Elijah turned to Gregory, confusion and anger warring on his face. "If you had this room, if your wife knew, why didn't you ever come find me? Why leave me at that place?" Gregory sank into a chair by the door, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "Because facing you meant facing what I'd done. To your mother. To you." He took a deep breath and began the story, the one he should have told long ago. The story of a young man's mistakes, a young woman's death, and a promise abandoned at a hospital gate. As he spoke, Ava watched silently, while Elijah stood by the window, his back turned, his shoulders rigid. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, casting the shadow of a boy who had spent his life dancing alone, now standing on the threshold of a truth he'd both craved and feared, and a future he'd never dared imagine. 3 days passed in an uneasy truce. Miss Wren remained under medical supervision in the Beaumont home, her condition stabilized but still concerning. Elijah stayed for her sake, sleeping in the blue bedroom but barely touching the new clothes Gregory had left for him, still wearing his old ones as if they were a statement. At breakfast on the 4th morning, he sat across from Ava, pushing eggs around his plate while she watched him with unwavering curiosity. He'd barely spoken since hearing Gregory's confession, processing the complicated truth in silence. The weight of it pressed down on him, the knowledge that he'd been both forgotten and remembered, abandoned and searched for, unwanted and prepared for. "You're going to see Miss Wren today?" Ava asked, breaking the silence. Elijah nodded. The doctors say she's well enough to be moved to Atlanta Medical Center for tests. We're all going, Ava said, glancing at her father, who had just entered the dining room, newspaper in hand. Right, Daddy? Gregory paused, taking in the silent boy and his expectant daughter. The tension between him and Elijah remained palpable, a gulf of years and hurt that seemed impossible to bridge. If that's what you'd like, sweetheart. Williams brought the car around precisely at 10 o'clock, the November sun glinting off its polished surface. Miss Wren sat in her wheelchair on the mansion's circular drive, attended by the private nurse Gregory had hired. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile in daylight, but her eyes still held their familiar sharpness. You don't have to come, Elijah told her quietly as he helped adjust her blanket. I can stay with you here. Hospitals don't frighten me, child, Miss Wren replied with a hint of her old spirit. I worked in one for 30 years, remember? Besides, she added, glancing toward Gregory, who stood by the car, there are still things that need saying. The drive to the hospital was a study in silences. Ava's curious, Miss Wren's dignified, Gregory's burdened and Elijah's defensive. They arrived at Atlanta Medical Center's imposing entrance, Williams navigating the Bentley through the crowded parking area to the VIP section. Mr. Beaumont, we've been expecting you, said a smartly dressed administrator who met them at the entrance. Everything is prepared for Mrs. Wren. The special treatment made Elijah bristle. She's Miss Wren, he corrected. She wasn't married. Of course, the administrator smoothly amended. My apologies. They followed her through corridors of gleaming tile and antiseptic efficiency. Other patients and visitors turned to stare at their unlikely procession. The distinguished silver-haired man, the elderly woman in the wheelchair, the girl with dark curls in her own chair, and the thin boy in worn clothes who didn't seem to belong with the others. After Miss Wren was settled in a private room, the doctors arrived for preliminary examinations. Gregory had arranged for the best cardiologist in Atlanta, a serious man with kind eyes who spoke to Miss Wren directly rather than around her, something Elijah noticed and reluctantly appreciated. We'll need to run several tests, the cardiologist explained. There appears to be significant damage to the heart muscle. Miss Wren, have you been taking your prescribed medication regularly? Miss Wren's eyes flickered toward Elijah. As regularly as circumstances permitted, she answered diplomatically. The doctor frowned, understanding the subtext. I see. Well, we'll create a new treatment plan based on today's findings. When the doctors left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Miss Wren looked between Gregory and Elijah, sensing the unresolved tension. He told you everything, she asked Elijah. He told me his version, Elijah replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Miss Wren sighed. There's only one version, child. What differs is how we each remember it. She turned to Gregory. You were so young. That's not an excuse, just a fact. Too young to understand what you were throwing away. Gregory moved to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. I've regretted it every day since, he said quietly. The St. Nest placement was supposed to be temporary, until I could figure things out, get established, but then you disappeared with him, Eleanor. I searched, but not hard enough, Miss Wren interrupted. A man of your resources could have found us if you'd truly wanted to. The investigators I hired said the trail went cold in Tennessee, that you'd likely left the country. A convenient conclusion. I never stopped looking, Gregory insisted. Even when Charlotte made me promise to focus on our family, on Ava, I still had people searching. Ask Darren. He's been on retainer for years. The mention of Charlotte made Elijah look up sharply. Your wife knew about me from the beginning? Gregory nodded slowly. She figured it out. Women's intuition, she called it. Said I had a sadness that came from somewhere deeper than normal regrets. His voice softened. Charlotte was extraordinary. She wanted me to find you, to make things right. She believed in second chances. Ava, who had been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly spoke. Mommy used to say that dancing heals broken hearts. She looked at Elijah. That's why you dance, isn't it? To fix your broken heart? The simple question, asked with a child's directness, pierced through Elijah's carefully constructed walls. I don't know why I dance, he admitted. I just have to. Will you dance now? Ava asked. Here? Elijah glanced around the sterile hospital room. Here? Ava nodded eagerly. For Miss Wren, to help her heart get better. Ava, sweetheart, Gregory began. I don't think this is the place for... Let him decide, Miss Wren interrupted, her eyes fixed on Elijah. Dancing is his language. Let him speak if he wants to. Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a softening, a surrender to something greater than his anger. Without a word, he slipped off his shoes, revealing socks with holes in the heels. The floor was cold linoleum, unforgiving and slick. Not a stage, not even as good as the rain-washed streets. But he closed his eyes and found that quiet center where movement began. His dance started slowly, arms extending, body turning in the confined space between medical equipment. There was no music, except the beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital activity filtering through the closed door. Yet Elijah found rhythm in the sterility, grace in the clinical environment. As he danced, the door opened quietly. A nurse entered, paused in surprise, then stayed to watch. Behind her others gathered, patients from neighboring rooms, medical staff on their rounds, visitors waiting for loved ones. Word spread through the floor's whisper network. Someone was dancing in room 412. Elijah was unaware of his growing audience. His movements had become more fluid, more expressive, telling a story without words, of loss and longing, of homes never found and families never known. He danced his history, his pain, his hunger for belonging. Gregory watched, transfixed, finally seeing what his daughter had recognized instantly, the raw emotion, the pure expression that transcended technique. This was what Ava had responded to on that rainy street corner. This was what had made her laugh after months of silence. This was his son, speaking the only way he truly could. Miss Wren's weathered face softened as she watched. For a moment, the years fell away and she was back in that hospital room, holding a newborn boy while his mother slipped away. "Forgive him," she whispered, so softly that only Elijah, spinning close to her bed, could hear. He was only a boy himself. The words penetrated Elijah's consciousness, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward through his movements. His dance changed, becoming something new, less angry, more questioning. He opened his eyes, found Gregory's across the room and held his gaze as he continued to move. In the doorway, the small crowd of observers had grown. Among them stood doctors in white coats and scrubs, watching with professional curiosity as the heart monitor beside Miss Wren's bed displayed a strengthening rhythm. For 5 minutes that seemed both eternal and fleeting, Elijah danced. When he finally stopped, standing perfectly still in the center of the room, there was complete silence. Then from the hallway, someone began to applaud. The sound spread, growing into a wave of appreciation that washed over Elijah, leaving him breathless and disoriented. Ava wheeled herself to his side, beaming up at him. "See? I told you. Dancing heals hearts." As the impromptu audience dispersed, Elijah moved to Miss Wren's bedside, suddenly alarmed by how pale she looked. "Are you okay? Did I tire you out?" She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'm fine, child. Better than I've been in years." Her eyes shifted to Gregory, who stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "That's what forgiveness looks like, Gregory. That's what it feels like. Remember it." Before Gregory could respond, Elijah swayed suddenly, his face draining of color. Without warning, his knees buckled and he crumpled to the floor. "Elijah!" Ava's scream cut through the room. Gregory lunged forward, catching the boy before his head struck the hard floor. "Get a doctor!" he shouted to the nurse who had remained in the doorway. "Now!" As medical staff rushed in, Gregory cradled his son's unconscious form, feeling the heat radiating from his skin, seeing for the first time the angry red lines extending from a cut on his foot, infection spreading through his bloodstream, while he danced through his pain, unaware that his body was fighting a battle it was losing. "He'll be okay, right?" Ava asked, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, promise he'll be okay." Gregory met his daughter's desperate gaze over the chaos of medical intervention, his heart breaking at the plea in her voice. "He has to be," he whispered. "We just found him." As they wheeled Elijah out for emergency treatment, Miss Wren caught Gregory's sleeve. "Don't leave him," she commanded, her voice steely despite her weakness. "Not this time, not again." Gregory nodded, a solemn vow passing between them. Former adversaries united in love for the boy who had danced his way into a family he never knew he had. 3 months later, the Beaumont mansion was transformed. Where once cold elegance had reigned, warmth now flowed through its rooms like a current. Streamers in rainbow hues cascaded from crystal chandeliers, balloons clustered in cheerful bouquets at every doorway, and a hand-painted banner stretched across the grand foyer. "Happy birthday, Ava." February sunshine spilled through tall windows, bathing the great room in golden light. A long table covered in a white cloth held a towering cake adorned with dancing figurines. Beside it stood smaller tables laden with presents wrapped in shimmering paper. Mrs. Abernathy moved efficiently among the preparations, directing staff with quiet authority, pausing occasionally to adjust a decoration or check a detail against her clipboard. In the garden, Williams was overseeing the final touches on a temporary ramp that had been installed over the terrace steps. The guest list for today's celebration was unlike any previous Beaumont gathering: 20 children from Ava's new therapy group, most in wheelchairs or using mobility aids. Upstairs, Gregory stood in the doorway of Ava's bedroom, watching as Anna, the nurse, helped his daughter into a new dress, a confection of blue tulle that matched her eyes. "Do you think he'll come down?" Ava asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. "He promised." Gregory checked his watch. Noon already and no sign of Elijah. "He promised," he echoed, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "He just needs time to get ready." The past 3 months had been a roller coaster of medical emergencies, cautious healing, and fragile reconciliations. Elijah's severe infection had required 2 weeks of hospitalization, including 3 terrifying days when his fever had spiked so high that the doctors had discussed the possibility of organ damage. Gregory hadn't left the hospital once during that time, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside Elijah's bed, holding his son's hand through the worst nights, whispering promises that, this time, he intended to keep. Miss Wren, too, had remained hospitalized, her own condition requiring a pacemaker insertion and careful monitoring. The doctors had been surprised by her resilience, commenting that her will to recover seemed directly tied to Elijah's progress. "She's fighting to stay here for him," one nurse had observed. "That's a powerful medicine." When both patients were finally discharged, Gregory had insisted they return to the mansion. Miss Wren now occupied a suite on the ground floor, her medical needs attended to by a rotation of nurses. Her relationship with Gregory remained complicated. Decades of resentment couldn't be erased overnight, but a wary respect had formed between them, founded on their shared concern for Elijah. As for Elijah himself, he remained a quiet presence in the house, still processing the seismic shifts in his life. He'd gradually accepted the new clothes, the proper medical care, the offer of tutoring to catch up on years of missed education. But emotional acceptance came more slowly. Some mornings Gregory would find him sitting alone in the garden, staring at the silver brooch, turning it over and over in his hands, as if it might reveal new secrets. "He's coming," Anna said now, glancing out Ava's window. "I can see him crossing the lawn." Gregory followed her gaze and felt his heart catch. Elijah was walking slowly from the garden house, the small structure where he often retreated when the mansion felt too overwhelming. He wore the suit Gregory had bought him for the occasion, dark blue with a white shirt. Even from a distance, Gregory could see how carefully he moved, still recovering his strength. "He looks so handsome," Ava said, clapping her hands in delight. Gregory nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. The boy had Gregory's height, his jawline, and his mother's eyes, Serena's eyes. Every time Gregory saw them, he felt the weight of what might have been. Downstairs, the first guests were arriving. The sound of childish laughter and excited voices filtered up through the house. Gregory helped Anna settle Ava in her wheelchair, now decorated with blue and silver streamers that matched her dress. "Ready for your big day, princess?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. Ava nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the door, waiting. When they entered the great room 10 minutes later, the party was in full swing. Children in various mobility devices moved or were helped around the space, which had been carefully arranged to be accessible. Parents stood in small groups, talking quietly as they watched their children play. At the center of it all stood Mrs. Abernathy beside an elaborate craft table, helping little hands with paper crowns and glitter wands. One chair remained conspicuously empty, a wheelchair placed at the head of the gift table, adorned with special balloons. Ava's place of honor, waiting for the birthday girl. "Where's Elijah?" Ava asked as Gregory wheeled her into the room. "I don't see him." Gregory scanned the crowd, a flicker of concern crossing his face. Had Elijah changed his mind? The suit had been hanging in the garden house, laid out carefully, but perhaps the prospect of facing so many strangers had been too much. The room quieted as guests noticed Ava's arrival. Mrs. Abernathy clapped her hands for attention. "Everyone, it's time to welcome our guest of honor. Happy birthday, Ava." The children cheered, some waving the craft projects they'd made. Ava smiled, but Gregory could see the disappointment in her eyes as she searched the faces, looking for the one person she'd most wanted to see. Then, from the grand staircase, came the sound of a single footstep. All heads turned. Elijah stood at the top of the stairs, still in his new suit but now barefoot, his expression a complex mixture of determination and vulnerability. For a moment, he seemed frozen there, poised between retreat and advance. Gregory held his breath. With deliberate grace, Elijah descended the first step, then the second. His movements had the measured quality of a dancer finding his rhythm, testing his strength. By the third step, music seemed to emanate from him, though no actual sound played. It was in the way he moved, the way he held himself, the silent poetry of his descent. The party guests fell completely silent, transfixed. Even the youngest children stared in wide-eyed wonder. As Elijah reached the marble floor of the foyer, he paused, gathering himself. Then, with a slight nod toward Ava, he began to dance. This wasn't the desperate street performance that had first caught their attention, nor the raw emotional outpouring from the hospital room. This dance was a gift, choreographed and practiced in private. Each movement told part of a story, their story, from separation to discovery, to the beginnings of healing. Ava's face lit with joy, her hands clasping together in delight. She laughed, that magical sound that had started everything, and the room seemed to brighten in response. Gregory watched, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions he couldn't name. Pride, certainly, gratitude, and something deeper, more primal, the recognition that this extraordinary boy was his son, a truth now acknowledged openly, without shame or hesitation. As Elijah's dance reached its conclusion, he moved to kneel before Ava's wheelchair. From his pocket he withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package. "Happy birthday," he said simply, placing it in her eager hands. Ava tore away the paper to reveal a hand-carved wooden music box. When she opened it, a tinkling melody began to play, and a small figure inside began to spin. A dancer, carved with exquisite attention to detail. "It's you," Ava exclaimed, "dancing for me." Elijah nodded. "So I'll always be dancing for you, even when I'm not here." The guests applauded, many wiping away tears at the touching moment. But Gregory knew there was more to Elijah's words than the others could understand, an acknowledgement that, despite the progress they'd made, the boy still wasn't certain of his place, still couldn't fully trust that this home would remain his. Gregory moved forward, drawing something from his own jacket pocket, an envelope he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Now, watching his children together, he knew the time had come. "I have a gift too," he said, kneeling beside Elijah. "For both of you." He handed the envelope to Elijah, who opened it cautiously. Inside was a photograph, the other half of the torn picture Elijah had kept hidden in his shoe all those years. The half that showed Serena, young and beautiful, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, her smile radiant, despite the circumstances that had separated her from the man beside her. "I've been trying to find this for months," Gregory said softly. "It was in Charlotte's things. She kept it safe, waiting for the day we'd need it." Elijah stared at the photograph, then at Gregory. Slowly he reached into his suit pocket and withdrew his own half, the portion showing Gregory holding a newborn. When placed together, the two halves formed a complete image, a family that should have been, might have been, perhaps could still be, in some new form. "I wasn't the father you deserved," Gregory said, his voice thick with emotion. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be that father now." The room had gone silent again, the party guests sensing they were witnessing something deeply private. Elijah looked from the photograph to Gregory, then to Ava, who watched him with shining eyes. 7 years of abandonment, of questions, of survival against impossible odds, all of it hung in the balance of this moment. Finally, Elijah did the one thing that came most naturally to him when words failed. He stood, took 3 steps back and began to dance again, but this time he extended his hand to Gregory, inviting him to join. Gregory hesitated, then rose awkwardly to his feet. "I don't know how," he admitted. "That's okay," Elijah replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can teach you." As father and son moved together in the sunlit room, their shadows merging and separating on the polished floor, Ava watched from her wheelchair, the music box playing softly in her lap. Miss Wren stood in the doorway, leaning on her nurse's arm, tears streaming unashamedly down her lined face. And outside, in the perfect blue February sky, a single cloud passed before the sun, casting a momentary shadow across the Beaumont mansion before moving on, leaving only light behind. Sometimes the dance of life leads us down unexpected paths, to connections we never imagined and second chances we may not deserve. Gregory Beaumont had everything money could buy, but it took the silent language of a dancing boy, his own forgotten son, to teach him what true wealth means. In the end, it wasn't the mansion or the power that healed this broken family, but the courage to face the truth and the willingness to begin again. What would you do if faced with your greatest mistake? Would you have the strength to rewrite your story, to stand before those you've hurt and ask for forgiveness? The hardest gates to open are the ones we've built ourselves, gates of pride, of fear, of shame. But as Elijah's dance reminds us, even the most painful movements can transform into something beautiful when performed with an open heart. If this story touched your heart, remember that second chances surround us every day, waiting to be embraced. Don't let pride keep you from reaching out to someone who needs you. Share this video with someone who might need healing today. Follow our channel for more stories that reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary and the family connections that transcend time and circumstance. Like, subscribe, and help us spread these messages of hope and redemption to those who need them most.